And so we are going live on YouTube.
Gotta get to the page.
I have to get registered myself here. Yeah, let's see. Now, what did I do last week? I had to do something to get on. I had to go to my. I think I had to go to my channel because it's not giving me the. It's not giving me the there now. Okay. So when I hit it to go onto the channel, to go live, it doesn't give me the chat.
Oh.
And so let me just put a greeting in. Good morning, everyone.
So my PDF didn't save to the right place.
3 is upcoming.
So we're right before Nox Tertia, right? On Liber Secundus.
We are on page 338. The end, the beginning of the second section. And so good morning, Anthony. Good morning, Kathy. Nice to see you. We are just getting ourselves organized, but we're nearly there. And so today we will be reading from the Red Book by C.G. Jung. The Reader's Edition is what I'm using. You can also use the folio edition, but it's a big book and kind of cumbersome. So that's why I've gone down to the Reader's Edition. And I meant to check that image, but I didn't. Anyway, do you have a big red book there in your space?
I don't. I have it probably in the box in whoever else's basement got all my stuff when I came
I know
here.
where I can find it. I can get it off of Dropbox. So when it comes to an image, we'll stop. All right. So what I want to do here, we're on page 338, and Jung is being checked into a madhouse. Okay, in his active imagination, he's being checked into a madhouse. Now, this is a madhouse of over 100 years ago, so you can imagine how lovely these places were.
Yeah. Once you're there, no matter what, you just keep your mouth shut. I mean, because they're just gonna, anything you say will be held against you.
Right. And so anyway, I'm going to describe this madhouse, since this is what our former president is going to check into on sometime this week. So he's checking in, and the superintendent says about his book, which is Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis. He says, the superintendent says, "Professor, can the man keep the book?" The professor says, "Well, I suppose so, as it seems to be a harmless prayer book." And then here's what he says. "Now my clothes are inventoried, then the bath, and now I'm taken off to the ward. I enter a large sick room where I'm told to get into bed. The person to my left is lying motionless with a transfixed gaze, while the one to the right appears to possess a brain whose girth and weight are shrinking. I enjoy perfect silence. The problem of madness is profound. Divine madness, a higher form of the irrationality of life streaming through us, at any rate, a madness that cannot be integrated into present day society. But how? What if the form of society were integrated into madness? At this point, things grow dark and there is no end in sight. And the footnote here says, in the draft, a passage occurs here, a paraphrase of which follows. Since I was a thinker, my feeling was the lowest, oldest, and least developed. And when he says that, this is a reference to his ideas about personality type, which were brought into the Myers-Briggs type indicator. Good morning. Nice to see you, Amela. And so his feeling function is the least developed. When I was brought up against the unthinkable through my thinking and what was unreachable through my thought power, then I could only press forward as a forced way. But I overlooked on one side and the other side sank deeper. Overloading is not growth, which is what we need. Okay, so the point I wanted to make about this is that, you know, many people are workaholics and they think that if they overwork or, you know, just work all the time, that they're going to get ahead. And somehow they never do. And this is his point, that overloading your life with one thing that you know how to do, namely working hard, let's say, isn't a way to go forward. It's not growth in your psychological development. It's stasis, actually.
Well, and I think there's a two-part dance partner with that statement, which, because I resonate with that so much, because I always say, I think I said in my book, forgetting is for getting. It makes more room for the good stuff to open up and breathe. And
right.
Was it Viktor Frankl said, those who cannot find deep meaning in life lose themselves in pleasure. And I always counter that to add to it, yes, though those who cannot find pleasure and joy in life lose themselves in too much meaning. And so you have to have the balance of honestly, consciously giving your heart enough breathing room, or even the oak tree that came out of the acorn, enough for him to grow and breathe. So if people fill the spaces between with cluttered words or cluttered actions, like the workaholic, it's kind of a look at me, which to me is rather juvenile. And you got to open up to what are you good at and what really nourishes what you're in service to. And it's like you in this channel. I mean, it's like it's one thing, but it's an everything one thing that, you know, it's not the only thing you do, but it's a primary piece that is a prime example of this is simply this, and it opens up to be what it is.
Right. Okay. So I'm going to go on now with part 2, and what Dr. Jung is talking about is the process of growth and how it applies to all of us. And, you know, it has a valuable lesson for society that we've kind of lost track of in our recent years. So we need to get back to it. And so go ahead.
One quick thing when it says, but Professor, I'm not sick at all. I feel perfectly well.
Yeah.
And look, my dear, you don't have any insight into your illness yet. The prognosis is naturally pretty bad, with at best limited recovery. Well, there's medical hexing right there, which is basically power of suggestion times 10. Mm-hmm. So if you're not a dull, sovereign, you'll
Yeah.
go, oh, okay, I have to go mow the lawn before I go to the pool. It's like, no, no, and no. And
Mhm.
what's interesting to me about this is, and maybe even a couple of notes, but it reminds me of the movie Man Facing Southeast, when this artist keeps, every season or so, periodically, he gets brought back into the insane asylum.
Mhm.
And after the third or fourth time, the chief of police is there and about to take him back and release him into society. And the chief of police asks the insane asylum warden, how do you know when he's ready to go back? And he goes, oh, that's easy. His art goes to shit.
Yeah.
So, there's the whole, if you have these things, these beautiful insanities, art, where reasons are absolutely unreasonable, you are like,
You are nature.
that with Pollock, you are nature,
Yeah.
which then they consider a sickness, which I find funny, because then, oh wait, you can't be controlled.
Yeah, that's the issue.
Because you're navigating your whole,
Right.
you're not controlling, you're navigating your whole own life. I mean, in
Right.
that sense.
Good point. I like that idea. Okay, so reading on, the growing plant sprouts a sapling on its right-hand side, and when this is completely formed, the natural urge to grow will not develop beyond the final bud, but flows back into the stem. In the mother of the sprig, paving an uncertain way in the dark and through the stem, and finally finding the right position on the left, where it sprouts a new sapling. But this new direction of growth is completely opposed to the previous one, and yet the plant nevertheless grows regularly in this way, without overstraining or disturbing its balance. And you want to comment on that paragraph?
Yeah, by one single quote, Anais Nin, when she said, there came a time when the pain to remain tight in the bud was greater than the risk it took to blossom.
Right.
And there's that continual outpouring that nourishes and actionably shows the development.
Right. Okay. That's a good quote. I like that quote. You want to read on while I write it down?
Sure. And there came a time, I'll repeat it for the audience too. There came a time when the pain to remain tight in the bud was greater than the risk it took to blossom. And then that's Anais Nin, Anais-Nin, Anais Nin. So on the right is my thinking, on the left is my feeling. I enter the spaces of my feeling, which was previously unknown to me, and see with astonishment the difference between my two rooms. I cannot help laughing. Many laugh instead of crying. I have stepped from the right foot onto the left and wince, struck by inner pain. The difference between hot and cold is too great. I leave the spirit of this world, which has thought Christ through to the end, and step over into that other funny, frightful realm in which I can find Christ again. The, in quotes, imitation of Christ led me to the Master himself and to his astonishing kingdom. I do not know what I want there. I can only follow the Master who governs this other realm in me. In this realm, other laws are valid than the guidelines of my wisdom. Here, the, in quotes, mercy of God, in quotes, which I had never relied on for good practical reasons, is the highest law of action. The, in quotes, mercy of God signifies a particular state of the soul in which I entrust myself to all neighbors with trembling and hesitation and with the mightiest outlay of hope that everything will work out well. I can no longer say that this or that goal should be reached, or that this or that reason should apply because it is good. Instead, I grope through mist and night. No line emerges, no law appears. Instead, everything is thoroughly and convincingly accidental. As a matter of fact, even terribly accidental. But one thing becomes dreadfully clear, namely, that contrary to my earlier way and all its insights and intentions, henceforth all is error. It becomes ever more apparent that nothing leads as my hope sought to persuade me, but that everything misleads. And suddenly, to your shivering horror, it becomes clear to you that you have fallen into the boundless, the abyss, the inanity of eternal chaos. It rushes towards you as if carried by the roaring wings of a storm, the hurtling waves of the sea. Every person has a quiet place in their soul where everything is self-evident and easily explainable, a place to which they like to retire from the confusing possibilities of life, because there everything is simple and clear, with a manifest and limited purpose. About nothing else in the world can a person say with the same conviction as they do of this place, in quotes, "You are nothing but," in quotes. And indeed, he has said it. And even this place is a smooth surface, an everyday wall, nothing more than snugly sheltered and frequently polished crust over the mystery of chaos. If you break through this most everyday of walls, the overwhelming stream of chaos will flood in. Chaos is not single, but an unending multiplicity. It is not formless, otherwise it would be single, but it is filled with figures that have a confusing and overwhelming effect due to their fullness. And footnote 179 there. Jung's marginal note to the calligraphic volume, January 26, 1919. The date appears to refer to when this section was transcribed into the calligraphic volume, i.e., not when it was actually written. Shall I continue? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry.
That's fine.
Let's stop and talk about this for a minute,
Yeah.
because we all face chaos, okay? And some of us withdraw into a really tight shell. We can't, we don't interact with people well, and we just take a defensive position. And I think introverts are like that. I'm an introvert, so I definitely tend to hang back and not venture out until I understand what's happening in my environment. And since my environment has changed so very many times in my lifetime, I'm able to deal with a lot of chaos, because I know that once I've stepped into chaos, I know that if I take the issues one at a time, eventually I'll find my way out.
Well, yeah, that, and also I fully resonate with that, and also that I feel truly we're never in or out. We are, because I find chaos to be another word for nature.
Yeah.
And when he says, he realizes all is error, 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 that I think some people, they try to find too much meaning, this means that, oh, look at what I did. It goes on my resume. It's a celebration. It's like an accomplishment.
Yeah.
And at that point, I always recommend, I know to my clients, take the idea of tossing the word control over the side of the ship. And it's a dead, restrictive, constrictive verb. but substitute navigate, to navigate, because that's alive. And like you navigate your car on a road you've never been on, well, you might not be going, full boat, all in, all out, because who knows where that next hairpin turn is, or the 600-foot drop off. But you really probably have no problem driving your car. And that's navigation in unknown territory in a very mundane, generally specific way. So I find the chaos is important, but to even, I guess, respond to Nietzsche with his, if you gaze long enough into the abyss will gaze back. And I say, sure, it sure will. But if you gaze too long into the abyss in the totality of its existential nothingness will lean forward and say, it's really rude to stare.
Right. Well, and everything's chaos, so you have to take things one at a time. So yesterday I was trying to wind up my prep for my surprise party for my wife, and we've been together now nearly 40 years, and 37 years, I think, officially. And but my wife is the stepmother of my daughters, and when I was 70, my wife ended up throwing two parties for me. One was a party that we invited all my friends, and then 2 weeks later, my wife says, well, I want to take you to dinner at your middle daughter's house. She just wants to have you over for dinner. So I said, fine, great, we'll dress up and go over there. And so we get over there, and they say, well, we want to take some pictures first, so we're going to meet at this place that has nice brick behind us. And then all of a sudden, they're my other two daughters who live in Albany and Boston area, showed up. And
surprise.
So surprise, it was just a wonderful, wonderful event. And so I was wondering how I could match that for Debbie's birthday, which was on the 9th of this month. And the girls couldn't come on her birthday. They wanted to come because Debbie has been a dear grandma to the grandchildren, and like a second mother to them for years and years. And so they very much wanted to come, but they couldn't make it on the 9th, so they could make it last night. And so on the 9th, I had a little bit of a surprise party where I invited a couple of dear friends of ours that are higher ups in NASA. And Debbie loves this couple, and I do too, but Debbie really gets into the NASA stuff. And so when we went to the table, they were supposed to be seated at the table when we arrived, but they were late. And so we show up at the table, and there are 5 seats, and there are only 3 of us. She said, oh, who else is coming?
Yeah, but then the surprise that they show up. That's
So anyway, they did show up a few minutes later, and that we had a lovely surprise that night. But then Debbie had said, I really want to be low key. I don't want to do something spectacular for my birthday. So I had given her birthday presents and all that, right? And meanwhile, my daughters were planning to come last night, and they'd flown in for the event. And so in the middle of the afternoon yesterday, I'm driving around trying to get helium balloons and find out where I could get helium balloons. and one of my daughters says, oh, well, instead of coming to your place, let's just go. Why couldn't we just go straight to the yacht club? I said, well, you won't be able to get in because you can't park there. And you have to have a sticker on your car to park. And so finally she agreed that that's what we should do. And then I said, and now I have to figure out what to do with these balloons, which I finally found. And one of them says, well, why don't you just take them over to the yacht club and give them to them to worry about until the party time? So I said, good idea. And I just turned right, went over to the yacht club, gave them the balloons, and went home. So then at about 5:45 last night, I just sort of leaned back in my lounger and started to take a nap. And so the girls were I knew exactly by the minute when the girls were going to show up because they were telling me what their nav was saying. And so I just sort of played possum, and then when the knock on the door finally came, I just said, oh, Deb, would you mind getting that? So Deb goes to the door, and there the girls are, and
Nice.
really surprised them. But that doesn't even get to the synchronicity. So there's this chaos of getting everybody together and sticking to the plan and all that stuff.
Well, I was going to say, because even the balloons became recalibrate. We're in the thick of it. Change.
Well, I went into Hallmark expecting to find balloons there, and they didn't have them. I'm trying to think, where could I get balloons? And so I said, well, you guys don't have them. Where can I get them? And they told me. So I happened to be right around the corner from the other place. So I went. And so then I had the balloons. And anyway, we sit down, and lo and behold, I've been trying to figure out how I was going to get in touch with this artist friend of mine whose work I love. I consider him the best impressionist in Maryland, at least in Maryland, if not in the East. And there, right in front of me, he sat.
Oh, nice.
And the interesting part is that two of my daughters have paintings of his, plus Geneva has a painting of his. And I had actually taken a picture of one of his paintings right before we went over to the club. I'm going to see if I can find it, because I'll show you how this thing came down. I have a few pictures that I can share for a minute.
Your whole story reminds me of kind of, anytime I watch anything about the Navy SEALs, the whole diagram of the mission, first you have to fully commit without knowing anything about the mission.
Right.
And then you know about the mission and you craft this elegant plan. And then the plan never survives past first contact. And so your first contact is, oh, I have these balloons. Everything just changed. Now what?
Yeah. So anyway, this is the surprise moment right after they had said surprise and come in, and Deb was really overwhelmed. And you could just see how moved she is.
Yeah.
Right. So anyway, I wanted to show you this painting. So here's the painting over Deb's right hand, which is a beautiful painting of a ballerina that he had done, probably 30 years ago now. And it's in Geneva's new room. And so then I'll just quickly go over to, so anyway, here's Deb with her balloons and my three beautiful daughters. You can only see two of them in this picture, but behind Deb's right shoulder is John Ebersberger and his significant other, Sharon Littig. They're both artists who I've known for 30 years at least. And but I hadn't seen John in about 20 years. So then I was able to get his email address to invite him to Confluence. I don't know if he'll come, but anyway, this is the scene of everybody together at the perfect dinner. It worked out quite nicely. But you have to stay flexible, and you have to just take it one.
Oh, you froze right there.
Have I lost you?
Yeah, you froze right at the. You have to stay flexible, have to stay flexible though.
Yeah, but anyway, synchronicities will just happen. They happen automatically. They happen in my life every day. And I mean, such that I can recognize them every day. But that happened to be a big one because I've been trying to figure out how I was going to make contact with John. And there he was, right over Deb's shoulder when I was taking the picture.
Well, totally. I mean, the journalist asked Georgia O'Keeffe, why, Miss O'Keeffe, do you paint your flowers so large? And she said, "Oh, Sonny, everybody looks. I want them to see." And so with the synchronicities, it's not just going slow to go faster or going slower to go faster. It's dialing into what is the resonant pace to be able to see the synchronicities that are already residing there. And I think so that as he says right foot and a left foot, each step you take is fully present. And when it's fully present, you've already inspected your expectations, which are the source of blind spots and mirages, what you want to see. Instead, it doesn't matter what you want to see, you see what is. And I think then you can pour what you want to see in. But what happens is that's creating and developing, in a sense, commanding into nature, your nature, to mix. And I think Jung said one of the best examples of synchronicity is when two individuals encounter each other by surprise and their gods remain anonymous. So in a sense, they both know they are nature. And so they just the whole party there, then everyone just simply interacts and there's an interdependent dance.
Oh, and it's totally, unscripted, obviously. Obviously, if Deb had known that they were coming, she wouldn't have been able to give that reaction and had that feeling, that feeling of her first moments when they were coming in the door was, really special. And but anyway, what the point here and of this passage is, all of us face chaos. That's what's going on around us. And, we can stay at home and cry about it, or we can get out in the world and live with the world. And when we get out and live with the world, we find it isn't as threatening as we think. And the question is, he says here, chaos is not single, but an unending multiplicity. So it's not formless, otherwise it would be single, but it is filled with figures that have a confusing and overwhelming effect due to their fullness. And so, well,
and that fullness, I think that's key. That fullness actually goes with the key word I think you just recently used, was unscripted.
Yeah.
Because the fullness means they are in command of their full sovereign identity. They are naturally themselves. And together, just even two of those with yourself creates a multiplicity. But I think when I love that you used the keyword unscripted, because as we've gone through this conversation about this paragraph, there's that old quote, and I'm not sure who it's by, but a prepared mind can easily go off script. And so what happens is that's, warm up, stretch, take the butterflies in the stomach as your right foot revving the engine to warm it up. Take some laps, but then don't keep writing out a plan. Life is what passes you by when you're too busy making plans. Get out there and live the plan into being. And there's that unscripted you were talking about.
Right. And the point is that, we go to the grocery store or the drugstore every day, and all those people are filled with their own lives, right? But every so often you run into a neighbor. And by the way, this is America. We live in diversity. No matter how much the white supremacists want to pretend that they can pull heavily to the right and everything will be hunky-dory, that isn't the way it is. And it's not the way, that isn't going to succeed, and it's not the way we live in any case. There's nowhere in America where if you go into a grocery store, anybody would think anything else of it. They might think it's odd that you're there. For example, the grocery store that was attacked up in Buffalo last year was mainly for the Black community, or it was in the region of the Black community. Therefore, it was mostly Black people. But, but the reality is that young man that killed all those people could have walked in there, and nobody would pay much attention to him, except for the fact that it was shooting as he came in.
Well, right.
And so, the popular saying when I was growing up was, if you do X, you're going to ruin your life. Well, yeah, his life is ruined. Also, the 10 people who he randomly killed, their lives were ruined too. And what were they ruined by? They were ruined by an idea that had gotten transmitted to this kid, and presumably by something like our former president. And unfortunately, that's
and you said pull too hard to the right. I think when people pull too hard to any side, front, back, left,
precisely
any other 360-degree sides, I think when people pull too hard to one side, it's not just a penduluming out of control. When you pull too hard to one side, you are in effect walking the plank of your life. You basically jumped overboard. You're no longer, here you go, in control. And we don't control anything. But the thing is, then you're not navigating anything other than, oh, look, I jumped in with the monsters,
Right. And the point that Jung is making in this earlier part, where he's talking about the branch that comes up on the right side, and then it gets to the point where it's going to bud, and then that energy starts to come back down and say, well, I got to find another place to go. And the next thing it does is put out a bud or a sapling on the left side. And if trees grew with all their branches on one side, where you see those kind of trees very occasionally from windswept beaches and that sort of thing. But normally trees grow symmetrically, although everyone is different. There's no, every oak tree is an oak tree, but everyone is different. So
the branches are slowly swimming into the air as the roots slowly swim right, left into the ground.
Yeah.
So Amela popped up. Did you have a?
Yeah, they know, but the point is, trees know which side of the tree they need a branch next.
Okay. Yeah, and that reminds me of the old Native American statement of, does the white man know that both of those wings belong to the same bird? Yeah.
So Mela, did you have a comment? Since you unclosed.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So today we're on 338 screw-in tees, or
We're on 340 now.
341.
Well, I'm not quite to 341 yet.
Okay.
We're still at the so he's doing this act of imagination. So he's imagining if you open this aperture. I mean, what I'm saying is we're all closed up in our self-defenses, and when you open the aperture a little, these, think of them as ghosts or spirits, will come through, and you know, you need to be aware of yourself and be aware of where you're safe and where you're not safe, and that's what growing up is about. And so now he's talking about these figures of the dead, which are you know, people that are, you know, they're not physical bodies, but they're you know, the ghost of Donald Trump whispering in your ear, oh, that man is a black man, and so therefore you're not safe, type thing, right? Which is the same thing that whispers in the ears of all white supremacists. They think they can control their world, but they cannot.
Well, and I think there's a point there where, with that defensive posture, if that's someone's MO, which it is a lot of people's. I mean, it go figure. We all have our own terrifying fears, but there's a point too when you realize walking around with all those guards up. One, the armor will fatigue you,
Sure.
and the best armor is just health. It's integrated armor, and then with health, then you don't walk around with the guards, because I think the guards of your armor are pretty much alluding to your expectations. I think I'm in danger from, so I'm going to prepare by putting on this breastplate or this deltoid plate or what have you. But when you can shed that armor to be unthreatened and engage the natural habitat, as it were, you know, as an animal, then I find it's much more abundantly clear that nature, you know, life is fatal. So nature will kill you. But at the same time, okay, fine, but I'm not dead yet. So that's not a concern. I don't need a guard for that. And I think then you can engage the poetry of just experiencing life, and then simply start to live more that synchronicity, rather than trying to sit around and smoke hope in some naive way, you know, the narcotic of hope version, some naive way to think that, oh, I hope I see a synchronicity today. It's like, just go buy a lottery ticket. You know, I mean, it's like, because that's the same thing. But if you engage and live, the synchronicities were already there. When, you know, was the butterfly always flying behind your head, but you didn't hear or see it? I mean,
Right. Well, you know, let's talk about hope. We are represent the physical manifestation of the hope of all of our ancestors. Okay, that's an important idea. Okay, going all the way back to whatever, you know, going back to single-celled organisms, you know, they reproduced at some level, hoping something new would come that would be good. They didn't know what, okay, obviously. And obviously, you know, when our great ape ancestors were living, they, you know, they went along swinging in the trees, hoping for the future of their children. That's why they had children. And it was just nature manifesting itself when they had children. They didn't really, you know, there wasn't a lot of great thinking going on there, you know, but the reality is, you know, if I think back on my grandparents, you know, obviously they went on with hope, even in great adversity. For example, my grandfather, who lost his fiance to the pandemic of 1918. You know, he didn't shrivel up and die. He went on with hope hope that he would find a woman to marry and live a happy life, right? And so, but anyway, but he was a bigot, so he had generations of people who were dead who were very, very sclerotic. Okay. And so they called people names because they, that's the way they thought in those days. And I just never think about it when I'm in a grocery store. If I see a black person or a African person or a Hispanic person or whatever, I really don't think about their race. I just see them as another human being.
And we're all mutts, we're all
And we're all mutts. Surely we are. I mean, that's right. And we were.
I mean, I'm Norwegian, but where's all this dark, well, at least up here, coming from? I mean, it's like, so there's probably Moorish or Romanian or it could be something Egyptian, but
Sure.
the Nordic, I mean, the Vikings got around and it's like, oh, look, we're out of food. Okay, let's hop in the boat and go steal the next country's food. I mean, let's go to a new place, I mean, but it's funny when you're talking about this sclerotic nature of the bigot there and all that 6 generations. It reminds me of one of my definitions of tradition. And tradition is just peer pressure from dead people. So
right. That's right. And so they were well-meaning. They set up rules and attitudes to protect themselves. That's what civilization is a bunch of rules so that we can keep as many people as possible safe. But when people don't want to play by the rules, then that's when we start having a problem, as we've seen. All right, let me read on here. I'm going to read about a page. And
actually, really quickly before you do,
go ahead.
You just made the best point of when people don't understand the rules that they're following. That's where a lot of danger occurs, because you're not sovereign, you're not commanding your life into being in a way that you're present with your wits. You're using someone else's peer pressure, who's most likely dead, and they're not there to push the pressure. You're pushing the pressure by your expectation of, I have to go by this rule.
Mm-hmm.
But it reminds me of the old story of the guy who says to his wife, he's like, honey, I want to do the roast this year, just like your grandmother taught you how to, and you taught me. I want to see if I can do the roast as good as her. So he walks in the kitchen and he cuts off the ends of the roast, and he marinates it and he puts it in the oven. And, long story short, they arrive at the table and he puts the roast down and serves the grandmother first. And he said, I did this roast. I just want to get your seal of approval. And she tastes it and she's, oh, this is so good. But why did you waste that 2 pounds? Where are the ends? He goes, oh, I did it just like you. You cut off the ends. She goes, oh, silly. I cut off the ends because back then my oven was too small.
Right.
You got to kind of know what restriction drove that, guideline. And if it's not necessary, then so is that guideline not necessary.
Yeah. Okay. So anyways, talking about these figures coming through and how chaos comes through. And so here's what he says. These figures are the dead, not just your dead, that is, all the images of the shapes that you took in the past, which your ongoing life has left behind, but also the thronging dead of human history, the ghostly procession of the past, which is an ocean compared to the drops of your own lifespan. I see behind you, behind the mirror of your eyes, the crush of dangerous shadows, the dead who look greedily through the empty sockets of your eyes, who moan and hope to gather up through all through you all the loose ends of the ages, which sigh in them. Your cluelessness does not prove anything, but put your ear to that wall, and you will hear the rustling of their procession. Now you know why you lodge the simplest and most easily explained matters in just that spot, why you praise that peaceful seat as the most secure, so that no one, least of all yourself, would unearth the mystery there. For this is the place where day and night agonizingly merge. What you exclude from your life, what you renounced and damned, everything that was and could have gone wrong awaits you behind that wall before which you sit quietly. If you read the books of history, you will find men who sought the strange and the incredible, who ensnared themselves and who were held captive by others in wolves' lairs, men who sought the highest and the lowest, and who were wiped by fate. Is that wiped or whipped? Must be wiped. Two P's would be whipped. So it's wiped
or
by
wiped by fate, meaning just like wiped off the map. But
yeah,
whipped by fate would probably be more colloquially clear.
yeah. Incomplete from the tablets of the living. Few of the living know of them, and these few appreciate nothing about them, but shake their heads at such delusion. While you mock them, one of them stands behind you, panting from rage and despair at the fact that your stupor does not attend to them. He besieges you in sleepless nights. Sometimes he takes hold of you in an illness. Sometimes he crosses your intentions. He makes you overbearing and greedy. He pricks your longing for everything which avails you nothing. He devours your success in discord. He accompanies you as your evil spirit, to which you can grant no release. Have you heard of those dark ones who roamed incognito alongside those who ruled the day, conspiratorially causing unrest? Who devised cunning things and did not shrink from any crime to honor their God? Okay, comments?
Yeah, who did not shrink from any crime to honor their God. I mean, most world level murders have occurred when, in the name of religion. Even though Native American, trying to remember which chief, said, look at our sun, that's real, and look at your God. Only you would have your God have a son, kill him, and then only then worship him, and then you kill everyone else in his name. So that's to me, that's wonderfully deep in a very simple, clear. Nature will kill you, but look, be clear with what you see. And I think that native, I won't even call it philosophy, I'll just call it life way, because it includes soul, spirit, everything, intellect. They're not backwards, they're connected. And that connection becomes that synchronicities in every breath and every moment. But yeah, that did not shrink from any crime to honor their God. It's like, wow, me, right. And, that's, I don't want to insult 4-year-olds, but that's 4-year-old toddler tantruming in grown people's bodies.
So now here it comes for Richard, who's our very serious Christian follower. Beside them place Christ, who was the greatest among them. It was too little for him to break the world, so he broke himself, and therefore he was the greatest of them all, and the power of this world did not reach him. But I speak of the dead who fell prey to power, broken by force and not by themselves. Their hordes people the land of the soul. If you accept them, they fill you with delusion and rebellion against what rules the world. From the deepest and from the highest, they devise the most dangerous things. They were not of a common nature, but fine blades of the hardest steel. They would have nothing to do with the small lives of men. They lived on the heights and accomplished the lowest. They forgot only one thing. They did not live their animal. Okay, now this is really an important concept here now. The animal does not rebel against its own kind. Consider animals, how just they are, how well behaved, how they keep to the time honored, how loyal they are to the land that bears them, how they hold to their accustomed roots, how they care for their young, how they go together to pasture, and how they draw one another to the spring. There is not one that conceals its overabundance of prey and lets its brothers starve as a result. There is no one that tries to enforce its will on those of its own kind. Not a one mistakenly imagines that it is an elephant when it is a mosquito. The animal lives fittingly and true to the life of its species, neither exceeding nor falling short of it. He who never lives his animal must trust his brother like an animal. Abase yourself and live your animal so that you will be able to treat your brother correctly. You will thus redeem all those roaming dead who strive to feed on the living and do not turn anything you do into a law, since that is the hubris of power. Okay,
And I think
let me read the footnote here.
You got it.
So there's a footnote. In 1930, Jung said in a seminar, "We're prejudiced in regard to the animal. People don't understand when I tell them that they should become acquainted with their animals and assimilate their animals. They think the animal is always jumping over walls and raising hell all over town. Yet in nature, the animal is a well-behaved citizen. It is pious. It follows the path with great regularity. It does nothing extravagant. Only man is extravagant. So if you assimilate the character of the animal, you become a peculiarly law-abiding citizen. You go very slowly, and you become very reasonable in your ways, inasmuch as you can afford it." Okay.
And that first sentence, the animal does not rebel against its own kind. I would add, nor does the animal allow the stupidest one to lead the group.
Yeah.
Because I think the group is the group, and the not hoarding and overabundance to let another starve. There's the whole, we have to make your own, but at the same time, there's also the sharing of connection with those, who you interact with, because I think there's the natural force, even to me in the tarot strength card, I always say it's about finding your own inner animal voice, that which is your true intense nature, and harnessing that before, during, or after it's continually being tempered. And the tempered piece applies here with, the most fine blades of the hardest steel. Well, take a nice Damascus blade, how many times has that billet been hammered, folded, rolled, reintegrated to be a monolith again, hammered, folded, rolled, split, hammered, folded, rolled in the heat of the fire. And there's a metaphor for making a sword in regards to how life is lived. You're continually, integrating these layers back into one sword, one tempered, psyche, life, attitude. You can put any word there, but I love this. The animal lives fittingly and true to the life of its species, neither exceeding nor falling short of it. There's the tree growing. It grows as high in the group as its roots go deep, and then each other tree can look and do the same.
Okay, so reading on, when the time has come and you open the door to the dead, your horrors will also afflict your brother, for your countenance proclaims the disaster. Hence withdraw and enter solitude, since no one can give you counsel if you wrestle with the dead. Do not cry for help if the dead surround you. Otherwise, the living will take flight, and they are your only bridge to the day. Live the life of the day, and do not speak of mysteries, but dedicate the night to bringing about the salvation of the dead. So, Jordan, how would you address this when he says, do not speak the mysteries?
I would say that is that the nonverbal, silent heart of the matter is visual and sits right next to your thinking as the heart of the matter in silence. So do not speak the mysteries. To me, I could take literally and say, swim the synapse, swim the dark midnight ocean, but simply swim. So the verb, action, but in silence, and that then nourishes the thinking. But so instead of do not speak the mysteries, I don't think it's don't tell someone else some secret knowledge. I think that's about inhabiting the space between, and inhabit the mystery, don't speak the mystery. Live the mystery, don't speak the mystery. It's the way I would speak in, where I would quote unquote speak, LOL, into that. What are your thoughts on do not speak the mystery?
Well, people who spoke the mystery in ages past ended up being burned at the stake, okay, because they threatened the power of the people who were in charge. And so, I'm not exactly sure what Jung is saying here, but what I do say, and we do on this program every Sunday, speak the mystery. There's no doubt about that. And the reason that we do is to make it accessible to people who don't have access to the Red Book and so on. And so we're talking about a mysterious thing that's happening in the psyche of all of us. I'm going to start teaching middle school students soon, and a week from tomorrow. And what I have to convey to them is they already know everything they need to know, or everything that maybe they'll ever know. Okay, now, what do I mean by that? Well, they already know everything that their ancestors took as natural, right? But society has been built up in a certain way so that we do have certain rules and laws, and those rules and laws are designed to manage civilization, to allow for civilization. And when you don't follow those, then typically what happens is society starts to break down. as we've seen, we've just had a president who said, "Oh, that doesn't apply to me." And he keeps doing it and doing it and doing it, and doubles down, triples down, and so on.
No,
And-
Mr. Johnson, I didn't throw the ball through your window. And the
Right.
dad walks up and said, "Son, you're going to be mowing his lawn and our lawn for years."
Right. And so, the question is, when our former president reports to, what is it, the Wright Street Jail, I hope that, I don't think they're gonna lock him in a cell, because there'll be too many Secret Service agents around to make that possible. And but I do think that it would be good if they walk them right up to the door of a cell and said, "Well, this is your future."
Mhm.
Because
I hope his butt doesn't have galvanic action with the toilet that's probably steel because he's been on gold so long.
Yeah, and all right, so going on. Now, did I read this paragraph, "When the time has come"? No.
We are, yes, we just finished with "but dedicate the night to bringing about the salvation of the dead," which is the last sentence of the paragraph, "when the time has come." So
Right.
for whoever
Okay.
well-meaningly.
For whoever well-meaningly tears you away from the dead has rendered you the worst service, since he has torn your life branch from the tree of divinity. He also sins against restoring what has created and later subjugated and lost. Subjugated and lost. For the earnest expectation of the creature waiteth for the manifestation of the sons of God. For the creature was made subject to vanity, not willingly, but by reason of him who hath subjected the same in hope. Perhaps because the creature itself also shall be delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groaneth and travaileth in pain together until now. Every step upward will restore a step downward, so that the dead will be delivered into freedom. The creating of the new shrinks from the day, since its essence is secret. It prepares the destruction of precisely this day. Precisely this day, in the hope of leading it over into a new creation. Something evil is attached to the creation of the new, which you cannot proclaim loudly. The animal that looks for a new hunting ground cowers, slinking and sniffing in dark paths, and does not want to be surprised. Please consider that it is the suffering of the creative that they carry something evil in them, a leprosy of the soul that separates them from its danger. They could praise their leprosy as a virtue, and could indeed do so out of virtuousness. But this would be doing what Christ does, and would therefore be his imitation. For only one was Christ, and only one could violate the laws as he did. It is impossible to commit higher infringement on his path. Fulfill that which comes to you. Break the Christ in yourself, so that you may arrive at yourself and ultimately at your animal, which is well behaved in its herd and unwilling to infringe its laws. May it suffice in terms of transgression that you do not imitate Christ, since thereby you take a step back from Christianity and a step beyond it. Christ brought salvation through adeptness, and ineptitude will save you. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, it's okay. This has already happened. Christ has already happened in this paragraph.
Yeah.
And what happens is it's already happened. So, this isn't about reruns. This isn't about broken records repeating themselves endlessly and honestly ad infinitum ad nauseum. I think this is about, okay, so that's occurred. In terms of transgression, don't imitate. I mean, there's imitation, maybe the first sign of genius, but then you outgrow that. And the imitate is, again, I think, don't speak the mysteries, live the mysteries, don't imitate the mysteries, because even imitation would be kind of a living speaking. So I think the step beyond it, step back, means you're missing the point. Because if you step forward and you step back at the same time, you've missed the center. And what I think this is saying, the salvation through adeptness, ineptitude will save you, meaning be stupid about that adeptness and come to your own adeptness. And then instead of, I become an adept, I become a master, I have mastery. Well, that's not that I'm king of the mountain and I'm all that. That mastery leads me to further discovery in my nature and in nature all around me and other people. So I think the ineptitude will save you is kind of key, that be dumb to what has come before so that your naivete can see what is nourishing now with the multiplicity around you.
Have you counted the dead whom the master of sacrifice honored? Have you asked them for whose sake they believe, and they have suffered death? Have you entered the beauty of their thoughts and the purity of their intention? And they shall go forth and look upon the carcasses of the men that have transgressed against me, or their worm shall not die, either shall their fire be quenched.
Yeah, that's food for worms, and
Yep.
the past people being the worms that will reconsume you back into nature.
Right, and there's a biblical quote here, which is Isaiah 66, verse 24.
And so yes, I say he would be talking about their fire shall be quenched, their worm shall not die.
Yeah. Okay.
There's also the Gospel of Thomas, in which he said that allegedly Jesus said, "He who is near to me is near to the fire, and he who is far from me is far from the kingdom."
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a really good example, Amela.
Yeah. Thus do penance. Consider what fell victim to death for the sake of Christianity. Lay it before you and force yourself to accept it. For the dead need salvation. The number of the unredeemed dead has become greater than the number of living Christians. Therefore, it is time that we accept the dead. Comments?
That reminds, I know there's a footnote, but that reminds me of then the Lament of the Dead interview.
Yeah,
Where
that's what I was thinking as well. The famous book of interviews, Lament of the Dead, which is interviews between James Hillman and Sonu Shamdasani, who were at the time the only experts on this book. Thus do penance, consider what fell victim to death for the sake of Christianity. Lay it before you and force yourself to accept it. For the dead need salvation. The number of unredeemed dead has become greater than the number of living Christians. Therefore, it is time that we accept the dead. And then a footnote. We were led by a prophet whose proximity to God had driven him insane. He raged blindly against Christianity in his sermon, but he was the champion of the dead who had appointed him their spokesman and with resounding trumpets. He shouted in a deafening voice so that many would hear him, and the power of his language. I don't know what that goes over to. Oh,
And
okay.
the power of his language so burns.
Also burned those who resisted death. He preached the struggle against Christianity. This was good too. And the references to Nietzsche. Okay. You say so, Carl. Okay.
Well, I think that this was good too. There's a both and in Nietzsche. You know, he'll soar the heights, but he'll also till and swim the depths, much like William Blake. So you're playing the light and dark, marriage of heaven and hell, but at the same time, which goes back to the who is close to the fire, who is close to me is close to the fire, who is far from me is far from the kingdom, that Amela brought up, because there's the both and at that point, because you get near and far, but the far is literally far, but the near has both the kingdom and the fire.
I don't think it's possible to have one without the other. You're always going to need both of them, just as you're going to need day and night. There's always going to be an opposite. That's just like the physics of existence.
Mm-hmm. And I think
not that I'm a physicist.
Well, no, but actually in a simple physics way, left foot, right foot. I'm over my feet. I use my feet, one, other. It's a very, very, it's kind of a juvenile example, but at the same time, everything, heart, head, solar plexus, sacral, the feet navigate, but I navigate the feet. So I'm above both sides, but then the body integrates above the legs. So even the human body going from the ground up or the head down is a metaphor physically, visually, of this both and. So that, in the legs, you have clearly one side and the other. But as you integrate it to the torso, and then basically you see it again in the brain, left hemisphere, right hemisphere, but it's contained, both hemispheres together. So you're right, you can't have one without the other.
And speaking on tradition, I was reading this article. It was by some marine biologist, and he was talking about some marine life that after their parents die and they're still newborns, they have to sort of navigate the ocean themselves. And so instead of having their parent teach them, because now they're dead, everything that they need to survive is innate. It's inside of their brain, it's inside of their body. So they already have a sense of how they're going to survive. But it's a little complicated for humans. I feel like we are a species that is very dependent on having someone to raise us, because when we are born physiologically, the only thing that a newborn human infant can do is just crawl, back and forth. And we don't really grasp that well, and we don't really understand. But for some other animals, like in this case with the marine biologist, these animals have to know what they're doing in order to survive. because they don't have any other means of surviving.
Well, and that's a good point too. To me, what comes to mind is when you get thrown a curveball and you get knocked down, did you land on your feet? What happens is, in a sense, you've been reborn, just like a fawn dropping out of a deer. Did you land on your feet and wobble and wobble and then wobble and then you start to walk? Or did you fall in a newborn clump like a human infant? And because right at the beginning, they're already in I think I want to move from being food to go eating food. I mean, so I think that's important that you brought that up, because did you fall on your feet is that point of when you fail, well, how do you land? And there's a whole new milestone in the moment when you land. So I think that here, then, moving forward through this paragraph, do not throw yourself against what has become, enraged or bent on destruction. What will you put in its place? Do you not know that if you are successful in destroying what has become, you will then turn the will of destruction against yourself? But anyone who makes destruction their goal will perish through self-destruction. Much rather respect what has become, since reverence is a blessing. Then turn to the dead, listen to their lament, and accept them with love. Be not their blind spokesman. There are prophets who in the end have stoned themselves. But we seek salvation, and hence we need to reverse what has become and to accept the dead, who have fluttered through the air and lived like bats under our roof since time immemorial. The new will be built on the old, and the meaning of what has become will become manifold. Your poverty in what has become you will thus deliver into the wealth of your future.
That reminds me of the Maui fire, because here are people who have literally seen everything that they've built their whole lives, probably, inheriting their parents' property and, watching their childhood burn to the ground and the place where they grew up burn to the ground, everything that they've invested their hard work and life's worth into just being gone, vanishing into dust forever. And then needing to start all over again to replace that. So now the person that lost everything, this is going to sound kind of insensitive, but it's not meant to. They can look at it from the perspective of, I've lost everything, sort of like hopeless. I've lost everything. I'm not meant to have anything good. Whereas they can also look at it as, I survived a fire. Like, this is a historic event and I've survived this. So the best thing I can do for myself is start anew, begin new, instead of, feeding into that destruction and saying, let my hope burn into that fire as well. Let my hope become the ashes of, my esteem.
Well, I think that's a good point with Maui, because when you're stripped of salvation, so to speak, then that's the time to be naturally your own strong self. And what I would add to that is, when you answer the phone, say no to the scammers trying to buy your property and get back to, your rebuilding. But so I think your poverty and what has become you will thus deliver into the wealth of the future. You bringing up Maui there is a very, very apt example of, you will thus deliver into the wealth of your future. And by not wasting trouble, your poverty and what has become you is, well, that's now. But you continue to live in and engage, and tomorrow is another day, the next moment's another day. And, today is always the day. So
Yeah, in my mother's homeland, um, there's a rule that you cannot build any property where a person will be living there. Like you can't build a dwelling. You can make a little restaurant, but it has to be in a certain way, like built in within the confines of like the legal blueprint. So no one can build anything within like 2 miles near the shore of the water, because Montenegro is Montenegro for a reason, because we have a lot of mountains, and I'm pretty sure some of those mountains are inactive volcanoes, but that's a whole different story.
Yeah.
But the point is, we don't want people having their apartments or their houses too close to the shore, because we're aware that eventually those waves might want to catch a drift and, go and swallow someone's house. So we've always had that rule where, you can't go too close to the shore.
And I think there was it may have been in Vitruvius's 10 Books of Architecture. He would say things like, do not build in a bog, do not build in a valley, build up higher in the valley, because at the bottom of the valley, there are noxious gases, and gases will make people stupid. And then he goes on to say, and also do not build too close to the shore, because sometimes the ocean misses the mountains and it will go see them. So, here comes the ocean and washes everything away. Because it's like, oh, time to go visit my mountain. So
Sorry, I've been a little distracted because I was looking for my unmuted. Yeah. Okay.
the 105.
Yeah, because I was looking for the image 105, but I can't seem to find it. So everybody who is following us on the Reader's Edition should get the folio edition for themselves so that they can see the fullness of this writing. But
I wonder, I can let me back up in my PDF, because I have the full. Let me see if I can.
Okay, so while you're looking, Jordan, I'm going to deal with these footnotes because they're rather long ones.
Okay.
All right, so when he says, then turn to the dead, the footnote reads, whose champion you are. So the point is what I was saying earlier, that you are the champion of your ancestors. You are the survivor, no matter who you are, how you physically got to life as a human being. You're the champion of everything that went before you. And so you listen to their lament and accept them with love. So this is basically what I've been doing for the last, I'd say, at least 10 years, maybe 15, in terms of trying to rehabilitate my grandfathers in my own mind. Because, one of them I thought, oh, well, he was a drunk traveling salesman, and, who cares? But, I know scraps of things about that grandfather. He got my father into the Naval Academy, and that's where my father spent World War II. So as a result of that fact of what he did and what he accomplished by getting my father into the Naval Academy, he kept him alive, and therefore I exist thanks to that grandfather on the one side. And on the other side, where my grandfather lost his fiance, he went on with his life and married another woman, and that other woman produced 3 lovely daughters, one of whom was my mother. And so even though, in my growing up years, I hated this man because of his bigotry, on the other hand, I understand him as a man of his time, and he had a lot of good features about him. He was a member of the first class of the Wharton School, unlike Donald Trump Jr.'s father. And so, you know, so we have to be their champion, be the champion of who came before. All right, now going on. Be not their blind spokesman, 185.
Did you freeze?
The reference is to Nietzsche. Okay, so I'm not going to go into the current affairs issue, but if you have,
You had froze right there when you began.
okay, I'm not going to go into this very far, 185, but it's not very complicated to put current affairs into this footnote and see what one of our leaders did. All right, now I'm going to read 186, which follows a reference to image 105. Have you been able to find it, Jordan?
Yeah, I think I got a good screenshot, and let me.
Well, you don't have to have a screenshot, just wherever you have it, then share your screen.
Well, my laptop wasn't on the internet, so I'm just gonna get it on the internet, send it to Gmail,
Okay.
and I can share because I'm on my iPad over here.
Oh, okay.
Just you can keep going, and I will just need a minute or two to send it to
Okay.
myself.
All right, so this is the footnote after this image, and I will read the footnote, which is rather long. In 1930, Jung anonymously reproduced this image in Commentary on the Secret of the Golden Flower as a mandala painted by a male patient during treatment. It was actually a mandala painted by him. Okay. He describes it as follows.
I like how he third person.
Huh? Is this?
I like how he third persons it.
Yeah, so this image is the image that we talked about with Gary, what's his name, right? I probably have this image right here. Then I just have to find it. Sorry.
Yeah, it's uploading, so I can then switch over, pick it up on my iPad where I'm here on the Zoom session.
Yeah. Let's see. I think okay. Jordan, I think this, I'm going to show it now. I think this is the image that he's talking about. Is it? I'm going to share my screen. Is that the image?
No, isn't that the no, I think that unfortunately.
All right.
Hold on.
All right, never mind. So anyway, Jung didn't admit to creating this image at first. That's the point here. Okay, he just introduced it as a mandala painted by a male patient during treatment. He described it as follows. in the center, the white light shining in the firmament of the first circle, protoplasmic life, seeds in the second, rotating cosmic principles which contain the four primary colors. In the third and fourth, creative forces work inward and outward. At the cardinal points, the masculine and feminine souls, both again divided into light and dark. He reproduced it again in 1952 in Concerning Mandala Symbolism and wrote, picture by a middle-aged man. In the center is a star. The blue sky contains golden clouds. Yeah, I just want to look at this again because I think it might be. I think it is this image, Jordan. Because of this, this seems to track the image that he's talking about. I'm going to just read it again. In the center, the white light shining in the firmament in the first circle, protoplasmic life seeds. I'm not sure what he means, but anyway.
Yeah, I'm resending it. The screenshot I got of it to send it over to myself to pick it up here was unfortunately selected, so it was all light blue, which is not going to show the accuracy of the image. I've almost got it.
Okay, all right. So in the second ring, rotating cosmic principles which contain the four primary colors. I'm not so sure this is the right one.
Almost there.
All right, I'm gonna drop out of that. All right, I'll leave this until at the end of this footnote says he reproduced this picture also as an at first unconscious attempt to restore order in the emotional state he was in, which he had captured by an invasion of unconscious content, or he had been caused by an invasion of unconscious contents. Okay. If you think you have it, that would be great. All right. But anyway, let me read on. Be not their blind spokesman. There are prophets who in the end have stoned themselves, but we seek salvation, and hence we need to revere what has become and to accept the dead, who have fluttered through the air and lived like bats under our roofs since time immemorial. The new will be built on the old, and the meaning of what has become will become manifold. Your poverty in what has become, you will thus deliver into the wealth of the future. Okay. So the point is, we have to keep going. And I think that's the point. All right, I'm going to read on with.
I got it.
Oh, you have it? Wait a
Yeah,
minute.
so let me get this.
Wait a minute. Let me set you as co-host so that you can share. Okay. There you go.
Got it. So go here.
Oh.
Can you see that?
Oh yeah, that's the one. Yeah, quite right. All right, let me try this description again then. You're quite right. That is the correct mandala.
Yeah, then that white and the colors make sense.
Right. Okay, so in the center, the white light shining in the firmament in the first circle, protoplasmic life seeds. In the second, rotating cosmic principles, which contain the four primary colors. In the third and fourth, creative forces working inward and outward. At the cardinal points, the masculine and feminine souls both again divided into light and dark. He reproduced it again in 1952 in Concerning Mandala Symbolism and wrote, picture by a middle-aged man. In the center is a star. The blue sky contains golden clouds. At the four cardinal points, we see human figures. At the top, an old man in the attitude of contemplation. At the bottom, Loki or Hephaestus with red flaming hair, holding in his hands a temple. To the left and right are a light and dark female figure. Together they indicate four aspects of the personality, or four archetypal figures belonging, as it were, to the periphery of the self. The two female figures can be recognized without difficulty as the two aspects of the anima.
And what's interesting at the bottom, the Hephaestus, if I flip that to being Hestia or Venus, then you have the night as the bringer of the light.
Yeah. Okay, so the old man corresponds to the archetype of meaning or of the spirit, and the dark chthonic figure to the opposite of the wise old man, namely the magical and sometimes destructive Luciferian element. In alchemy, it is Hermes Trismegistus versus Mercurius, the evasive trickster. The circle enclosing the sky contains structures of organisms that look like protozoa.
Mm-hmm.
The 16 globes painted in four colors just outside the circle derived originally from an eye motif and therefore stand for the observing and discriminating consequences. Similarly, the ornaments in the next circle, all opening inward, are rather like vessels pouring out their content toward the center. There is a similar conception in alchemy, in the Ripley scroll and its variants. There it is in the pleasantry cards, who lost my place here. Okay. There it is in the planetary gods, who are pouring their qualities into the bath of rebirth. On the other hand, the ornaments along the rim open outward as if to receive something from outside. This is in the individuation process what were originally projections stream back inside and are integrated into the personality again. Here, in contrast to figure 25, above and below, male and female are integrated as in the alchemical hermaphrodite. On March 21st, 1950, he wrote to Richard Piper concerning the same thing, quote, "The other picture is by an educated man about 40 years old. He produced this picture also as an at first unconscious attempt to restore order in the emotional state he was in which had been caused by an invasion of unconscious contents.
Mhm.
Okay.
And what's interesting to me, you have the 8 spheres that have the perimeter, semi-permeable membrane in red, the circumference outline, probably a better word, outline in red. But then you have those 16 spheres that rotate, not so much as moon lunations, but each of those red outlined spheres has 3, one each on the bounds and one in the center. If I take a trinity and then move to the next sphere and then the next sphere, if I hopscotch or jump over, I have 3, and then the 1, 2 forward has 3, then there's only the one center between. But what happens is then there are 4 trinities with 4 centers of the space between those 3, if that makes sense. Where if I take the top 3 and then skip the next sphere and move to the side sphere by the female figure on the right, I've had 3 on the side and 3 on the top. Well, that leaves the one in the middle, and you can rotate that around. And I think it's interesting with the 4 psychological functions that you have these 8 trinities, but they each share their bounds, or their ones that are on either side, but they each have their own specific center.
Okay, I think that this is getting a bit attenuated, and I have to admit that I was just hypnotized for a period of time. I literally fell asleep as I was reading, so I hypnotized myself by doing the reading, which sometimes happens to me. So can you give the screen back?
Yeah, got
Okay.
it right here.
And so our listeners can be forgiven if they have fallen asleep as we're talking about these things, because I find that some Jungian texts, if I keep reading them, they literally hypnotize me. They literally put me to sleep. And that doesn't mean I think they're boring. What is happening is that the way a hypnotist does an induction, a hypnotism induction, is by overwhelming the conscious psyche. And then you fall into an unconscious state, a hypnotic state, and then you may wake up for it and be able to move on. But that's what happens, or happened to me just now. And so it's okay if it's happening to you. Michelle says, interesting question. I was wondering why Toth was percolating in my mind. I didn't study ahead. Life has been turbulent on my end. Richard says, Jordan, a perfect definition of the Christian Trinity. Okay.
Thank you.
I was out when you did that perfect
Yes.
definition, but anyway, please don't do it again. I'll be hypnotized again.
There you go.
Miss it again. This is also why I cannot stay awake in church or in religious presentations, because I'm too susceptible to hypnosis, and I literally fall asleep. All right, let me finish this off. I want to try to finish at least this Nox Secunda. I'm not sure I can. I'm gonna stop at the end of this paragraph where there's a break. And so let me just read into this. Then turn to the dead, listen to their lament, and accept them with love. Be not their blind spokesman. There are prophets who in the end have stoned themselves, but we seek salvation, and hence we need to revere what has become, and to accept the dead, who have fluttered through the air and lived like bats under our roofs since time immemorial. The new will be built on the old, and the meaning of what has become will become manifold. Your poverty in what has become you will thus deliver into the wealth of the future. And so, this is basically what Jung is saying. He wasn't really understanding what was going on at the time that he was doing this active imagination, but he did live it on into the future, and that's how he became C.G. Jung, and not just some other joker who was writing about mysticism and that sort of thing.
But I think it's important actually to back up and revisit the comment of, I wondered why I was thinking about Thoth. And what's interesting is, Thoth, learning, the library, writing, all that. What's interesting though, that's just a single portion of the 4 parts of Thoth. And you basically have the moon, reckoning, learning, and writing. So between, learning and writing is one thing, but the moon and reckoning, the moon, Luna, you have lunatic, you have intensity, you have intuition, intuition. Reckoning is then consequences, but they're realizations. So you have both the moon unconscious and the reckoning conscious. So I'm wondering about if the comment could be expanded a little more from even that perspective, if that speaks to, I wondered why Thoth was going through my mind. It doesn't seem so random. It seems to be right on the money with that image 105.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that resonates with that comment from the perspective of whose comment was that?
It could also be probably if the person had read Man and His Symbols. Thought is brought up a few times in the book, Man and His Symbols.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that one of the things that's important about this general passage is to understand that when religious ritual is different from what you're used to, instead of just writing it off and saying, oh, this is awful, it seems to me you're much better off trying to learn about it, learn what it's doing. And because both Catholicism and Protestantism get you to heaven. Okay.
All roads lead to,
all roads lead to, as does the Bhagavad Gita. Okay. And so rather than say it has to be this way and no other, we need to say, this is the way my tradition had it, but what can I learn if, in my case, I'm a Protestant, so what can I learn from the Catholic approach, which is more mystical, I think. And, in the case of Islam, what can I learn from Islam? Because most of the Old Testament is contained in the Quran in one way or another, or
it is
referred to in the Quran.
It is, and if I apply the goddess of doorways, Janus, you've mentioned it, to and from. She is both to and from, which is the nature of doorways. That if all roads lead to, then what happens is that's implying that they came from, and they came from self, lead to self, but through the passage, you're in community with both self, people, others' nature. So I think that to and from, because you were talking about to, and then what can I learn from Islam? So you just naturally were playing the goddess of doorway, Janus, of to, from to, even just in the navigational direction sense.
Yeah, and I've done a lot of travel in the Muslim world, and there were obviously some mysteries there, including the meaning of Eid al-Adha, which I just never bothered to find out from an Arabic speaker what it referred to. And then Deb and I had this Palestinian girl staying with us, and one morning she came out of the bedroom and saying, "It's Eid," like it was Christmas. and I said, "Well, what is Eid? Tell me about it." And it turns out that it's the story of Abraham and Isaac, or Abraham and Ishmael. And that's what Eid al-Adha is. And in my Jewish friend, I have a friend who was at one time the president of the World Union of Progressive Jews, and who wrote a book called What's in It for Me. And his book, says what was so significant about the story of Abraham and Isaac, and what it is Abraham had a vision that they didn't need to sacrifice their children anymore to God.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so God told Abraham, regardless of how you choose to believe it manifested, but Abraham was told, you don't have to kill your kid. You can go grab a wild goat and sacrifice that instead. And so it was the end of human sacrifice in the Western world. Now, whether we have ended human sacrifice is an entirely different argument, because I argue that the various walls and monuments down around the Lincoln Memorial are all monuments to our sacrifice of our young to
I think that's
the god of something, the god of war, whatever.
Well, that biblical point of departure from the old to the new, as it were, reminds me a lot too of the psychologist Julian James' book, The Origins of Conscious and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind. And the bicameral mind would hear voices, take them literally, and make each one a god. And what happens is then the metaphor of child sacrifice then really was your sacrifice in your whole life up to this point. Everything before you is childish, and now you're to be childlike, renewed. And then what happens, though, is instead of literally taking the I'm moving forward, I'm evolving, then, I don't actually have to kill the kid. It's a matter of me understanding that life is about creation destruction, and life is about the death of the previous, causing the resurrection in the now. And I think what happens is then there's an evolution of consciousness there where, I'm not subject to these dreams. I'm having these dreams, and I don't have to deify all these psychic contents. I can start to understand that these are lessons, tools, actually utilities in the psyche to be utilized.
And we already have them there, and the object is to open them up so that we know that they are within us, right?
Yeah, and that's a self-reflection in Abraham of, this is within me, not an external thing to do. And that's even in that one of the previous paragraphs. If you are not an animal to yourself, you will treat your brother like an animal. And I think that's important. So instead of projecting outside, it's understanding or comprehending or actually just not speaking the inside, living the
Yeah,
inside.
it is us. Now, Justin made a couple of interesting quotes here. He says, this is from William Shakespeare, quote, "These are now the fashion, and so be rattled the common stages, so they call them, that many wearing rapiers are afraid of goose quills and dare scarce come thither." So they, those wearing swords are afraid to come to people who can wield the pen. And then he says, I was more afraid of Abu al-Faizi's pen than of Akbar's sword. And of course, Akbar is God. Yes, because God would sacrifice his own son as himself. And then Justin says, by the way, the pen is mightier than the sword, as was by Edward G.E. Bulwer-Lytton. Okay.
And if you create the quill also too with the feathers on an arrow, I mean that they literally shoot from afar. So the pen shoots from wherever it is to land.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be near.
So, and Dionysus says, he said, "Oh Lord, there are many around the drinking trough, but there is nothing in the cistern."
Nice.
Okay, let us.
Yeah, make sure there's water in the pool before you dive off.
Go ahead, Amila.
I was gonna say it's interesting, that we sacrifice a goat instead of a child, because in another religion, the goat is a child.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing too. It's like, what's
one man's trash is another man's treasure, but in sacrificial terms.
Yeah, well, as Anthony says, end of child sacrifice and the beginning of scapegoats.
That nice pun. Nice pun.
Right. Very much so.
Yeah, because that's sacrificing someone through words rather than blood.
Yep. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. I think my self-hypnosis is reaching a top level here, so I probably ought to call it a day.
And image 105 is really good for that, because you get the 8 to 4, the 1 to 3, you get 4 fours, trinity of quaternities, and it just keeps moving and moving and moving. The numbers actually, just from if I didn't even say words and just started doing numbers, I could just bounce all over that image all day long with groupings and numbers and number groupings, and they all would be basically saying the same thing, just at different scales, as you shift focus and redirect scale to what
is the same thing? What is being said?
Self.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm also on that self part, and rereading Man and His Symbols. I'm trying to understand the shadow and the psyche in terms of how, in an existential perspective, like the meaning and the purpose of one's life. And you reminded me, Jordan, on page 151 of the Man and His Symbols, it writes symbols of meaningful containment, and it talks about middle age and old age. And I highlighted a sentence here about inner transcendence of old values in creating, not just inventing a new pattern of life. So it's like this transitioning from one stage in one's life onto another. And every decade in a person's life, we have this new revelation where we use the information of the past or what we're learning in this moment now. And for me, tradition is sort of like a foolproof way of doing things. you know, like
But you
if
still, yeah.
I'm not gonna reinvent the wheel, but as that tire company said, you can always improve the wheel, right?
Well, and the funny thing about foolproof is if something is foolproof, nothing is foolproof from the fool. So, it's
Right,
like,
and that's the dark side, right? That is the shadow,
Mm-hmm.
right? Yeah,
and yeah, and
and
go ahead.
well, and so the whole point about the shadow is simply that that's the side we don't want to give cognizance to, but we have to.
Well, and I jump a little, I spread out to a scale just outside of that one to me, in big picture, the shadow is the midnight ocean of the unconscious. And the consciousness is then how we're here aware in life, night and day. And it's interesting to me, a lot of times people say shadow, evil. I just say shadow equals depth. So if you have a lot of shaming behavior, ecclesiastically included, well, then the shadow is going to be something you don't like about yourself. But I find that to be kind of honestly, an expectation, kind of a mirage of a blind spot. So that even image 105 being about self, but I think self in context, because then that self is also the world and how we inhabit the inner self, how we inhabit the self of our life at any given scale. What is our context? Where are we? How are we connected to self and other at the same time? And then that image has so many wonderful utilities in each side.
Yeah,
And even
the point I want to make here, though, is that this image, the Taoist image, doesn't quite get it. I've come to a new image that I think is more appropriate, and that is the image of the child with the two snakes. Okay, because we all have these dualities in us. That's a fact. I agree with that in terms of the Taoist symbol. And they're in their thousands. They're not just male and female or good and bad or something like that. These dualities are in everything, what kind of Coke do you like type thing. And the point of human life now is that if there's a duality, this is the two snakes that the child is holding. That's the job of the human being. That's where we have to evolve to the point where we understand that our place is between those two snakes, and we have to hold on to both sides. And that's why I wear purple very often. The reason I wear purple very often is it's not blue and it's not red. It's the combination of the two. And that is the way we have to have an effective country from a current affairs or a governmental point of view. It has to be some shade of purple. If we pull over so it's fire engine red, or we pull over so it's beautiful indigo blue of the ocean, we're nowhere in both directions.
So
Well,
if
and that-
I'm understanding
Go
correctly,
ahead.
Skip, sorry, Jordan, if I'm understanding correctly, it seems like the way that you're mentioning the shadow is sort of like a carbon footprint. So it's always going to be there and it's going to catch up to you eventually,
Correct.
one way or the other.
Yeah, it's always there.
I don't
And
think
our
I don't think
lifetime
it's going to catch
task.
up to you. I think the light is created by and nourished by the dark. I think they nest the spirit and the soul. So I don't think it's going to catch up to you. I still think that's I'm going to get in trouble. I'm grading myself. I'm still in school. I think when we live, it's not catching up to, it's dive into the midnight ocean, swim with the monsters, make besties with beasties, instead of sitting around in some tension of terror that, oh no, something's going to come get me. So I don't look at it as I'm trying to not fall prey to some negative component of my personality. I try to take the good and the bad out and what is. And I see that the light nests in the dark. And so it's not catching up to me. When I'm most connected, I have both light and shadow as one thing. And even if I put a shape or an object down on the table, its shadow is not bad. It is cast like a spell from the self of that object. So I think it's integral in that way, rather
That's
than
absolutely integral. And
yeah,
that,
I'm not trying to run
That
from the
kind
law.
of, yeah, that kind of
Oh,
reminds
oh.
me of someone had said once, if you want people to not to talk about you, don't do anything, don't say anything, don't be anything. So it's like, so basically you just want me to not exist, you know?
Well, and I
So-
think that goes with the, ignore the gossip and beware the gossiper. Because if you don't have someone talking about something, you're probably not doing something right, because that means you're not doing anything identifiable,
right.
which is
Yeah,
going to happen.
because
I mean,
in Skip's perspective, in Skip's perspective, going forward, it would sound like maybe that paradox of like joy and suffering together is in the pleroma is the rainbow of the darkness and the light. So
which it is, which, I'm sure every woman who's in the midst of giving birth is ruining the day that she ever thought she would have a child or another child. And yet that child represents the future, and that child is the rainbow. And so you have, in the end, I guess you have to, a woman who has a child has to surrender and her independence in order to have a child, because you're taking on at least a 20-year responsibility. And, it's filled with pain, but the child is the rainbow also, right?
And I think that brings to mind the joy and pain, but suffering is a choice. So that through the pain, that mother, for example, if she doesn't waste trouble, she finds all the joys of the treasure of what this relationship with the child is, what's her relationship with herself, just the child to itself. I mean, so there's a lot of, don't waste trouble, find the treasure in the trouble. There's joy and pain. That's kind of necessity, but the suffering to me can be choice. And suffering then I think would align with what you were saying, Amal, of, it catches up to you. That to me, that's a choice. I'm not running from the law of the shadow. It's like, new sheriff in town in the shadow, and I'm trying to get away. I'm on the lam from the shadow. No, I turn around and go, you want to have lunch? It's like,
Yeah. I mean, I guess my point is that, if you use the yin yang symbol, then everything's always in motion. But if you accept the idea that in all dualities, there is going to be a position on the scale, right? Between black and white, you're not going to be either black or white. You're going to be somewhere on the scale.
And even if you're in the middle,
to know that's the role of the human being, is to carry that paradox, carry those two snakes. But it's not two snakes, it's 100,000 snakes, because it's two snakes for every duality, right?
Well, and even if you walk the middle path, you may think you're going in a straight line, but you're going in a serpentine. So even walking the middle path, it has its own right foot, left foot on both sides.
Dionysus has a quote here if they ask you, what is the sign of your father in you? Say to them, it is movement and repose. Yeah. I mean, that's a
nice quote.
duality too. That's a duality too, movement and repose. So,
And movement implies form. And there's the Saturn formative, age 7 to 14, the child moves towards the dad rather than the nurturing mom from 0 to 7. So the movement implies form because something is moving. Even if it's energetic, well, then that's the identity. So actually more identity than form, I'd say.
right on. Okay, well, let's all stew on all that.
Thanks, guys.
This is one of the, I guess, more complex chapters of the book. But I do love it anyway. All right, so we'll finish up with my Nox Secunda next week, and possibly start with Nox Tertia, or whatever it's called, the third.
Yeah, not Tertia.
Yeah.
Cool.
So Peace, thank you for being here.
Yeah.
I very much appreciate also the YouTube audience, which has been very good and large. So peace.